Issues, a podcast where we do in-depth discussions on a single comic book. I am your host, renowned goggle fetishist Jonah Gregory, and with me today, my co-host Karen Bennett.
I'm sure that I heard something, but that really got me. My name's Karen.
This entire first one is about goggles, so...
it is.
Yeah, today we are covering the second half of Watchmen. So this is part 2 of our discussion. We're covering books 7 through 12. So it's a beefy boy, as we've mentioned before, this book.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so Watchmen is a book that probably needs no introduction, but what did we cover last time in Watchmen?
Last time in Watchmen, we did issues 1 to 6, and, some stuff happened.
Do you remember? Because
I do. No, I do.
Okay.
As I was very facetiously saying, some stuff happened. I actually kind of remembered what happened. Basically, this is like an alternative sort of, past where superhero, or rather costumed heroes are real, and they've kind of influenced the geopolitical landscape of the world, most notably the United States. And so obviously they're now illegal because, everything is. And someone's going around basically killing off masked heroes. And so we're trying to figure out what's going on. And where we last left it, the kind of primary sort of driving force of the investigation, the detective / complete fucking crazy person, Rorschach, had just been arrested by the police and was being sort of psychoanalyzed in the prison, which was a good time for everyone involved. I think.
Oh yeah, didn't ruin anybody's lives. Everyone lived happily ever after. They cured him. And then he went on to, get a normal job and have a happy family life. No, none of this happened. This is Watchmen. It's much too dark. And I don't think we've mentioned yet that this is Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons were the creative force behind this comic. And interestingly enough, we both watched the same little interview with Dave Gibbons about Watchmen. And it was interesting to find out that... And it kind of makes sense, having read the book. Like, they didn't have a lot of editorial involvement. Like, they did have editors, he mentioned in the interview, but because they weren't using established characters, it gave them free reign to do whatever the hell they wanted with those characters, which I thought was a good move on their part to have gone with original characters. Because
100%.
Because they would not have gotten away with probably 90% of this book had they been using... I remember in the fun facts in the last episode, you mentioned they had acquired some kind of not as well-known characters and they were thinking of using them
from another company. Yeah.
They would have probably had their hands tied pretty heavily if they had tried to, kill off characters and stuff. I mean, not that DC doesn't do that occasionally, but I mean, how many times has Hal Jordan died and come back?
Like 4 or 5.
Yeah. I was going to say at least 3, I think. So anyway, Watchmen, and one other clarification. On the first episode, I mentioned that I had seen the movie fairly recently and it was fine. So the day after we recorded that, I rewatched the super ultimate edition that had the Black Freighter stuff. First of all, apologies to having called that a motion comic because it was actually much better animated than that. It did have that little bit of a Flash animation feel where things kind of, instead of feeling hand animated, they feel like drawings that are kind of puppeted a little bit, but
so it felt like really keyframed and
which is fine. Like, it was effective, the movie itself did not hold up at all. It was it completely missed the point of the book, being like having things to say, and this was just like, aren't these characters cool? Also, the most hilarious thing about it was that, unlike in this, where when they try and form the more modern team and the comedian basically just laughs in all their faces and tells them it's pointless, they actually form a group called the Watchmen, which is not a thing in the book at all.
Okay.
And
interesting.
I could not stop laughing when that scene happened. So
I do not remember that at all.
Yeah.
My gosh.
Yep. So they keep referring to the Watchmen as this former superhero team that they were all on. which, given what happens in the book surrounding those similar events, I was just cracking up. So yeah, that was just something I really wanted to point out. I was wrong. The movie did not hold up at all for me. And I just, having just finished reading the book and then immediately watching it, really pointed out all the flaws of the movie.
It was actually interesting as well in that, the interview with, Dave Gibbons, he actually said, at one point, I can't remember what the genesis for him saying this was, but he said like, oh, sorry that everyone had to read all these like really grim, super dark comics after we published this. That was really not our intention.
Yes.
At all. That wasn't what we wanted people to take away from it. Yeah,
he said that, that's exactly what he was talking about. He's like, yeah, him and Alan Moore were huge comic book fans previously, like growing up. And, he was talking about how like comics were fun, but they wanted to do this other thing. And then they thought then they could go back to like writing and reading fun comics, and they kind of ruined the industry by writing Watchmen.
Yeah. And it was actually, that also like kind of relates to what, Alan Moore said about when they did, before Watchmen. Where he said like, we did this interesting new thing, and now they're basically fucking it up by just making it like everything else.
Right.
So it's interesting that like they obviously had like an intention to do one thing and kind of do like something different. And then what people picked up from it was just something completely different.
Yeah. Like, everyone learned the wrong lessons is a thing I associate with the Watchmen anytime I think about it.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, do we want to get into the comic proper then?
Yeah, 100%.
First of all, we forgot last time. Huge shout out to WatchmenComicMovie.com because we are using their recaps instead of writing our own because, podcasting is a very time-consuming process, and if we can find other people's summaries and give them a shout out, I would definitely be happy doing that. So, I just wanted to give them props for writing these really good summaries so that it would help us with our discussion and save us a hell of a lot of time.
Yes, you can. Their website has not been updated in like 3-4 years at this point, but you can still go and follow them on Twitter. They're at WatchmenCommov.
Okay.
On Twitter. So go and follow them if you want to know more about, Watchmen.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to jump into Watchmen number 7, A Brother to Dragons. This one opens with, Dan finding Laurie, touring his basement hideout. Now, for a reminder, Dan is Night Owl. He's kind of a Batman-esque, like, gadget-using hero, who has, like, his underground, lair that's kind of a Batcave-ish thing, except it kind of connects up to, like, a subway platform or something so that he can fly out into the city. That part's never really explained. And then Laurie is the Silk Spector who, took the mantle from her mom. So she's a second generation hero who was kind of forced into it. And they've slowly been developing this friendship, and maybe more, wink, wink, as this issue goes on. So she's down there touring the basement hideout, and he finds her down there and starts explaining, all of his gadgets and the mementos he's kept. And she's like, oh, these are so cool. And he's just like, yeah, whatever. Everything sucks and I suck. And he has no self-confidence at all.
None whatsoever, which is...
one of the things I saw in one of the reviews I was reading of the movie, where someone was saying Dan's portrayal in the movie is he like smirks in before a fight scene, and they're like, yeah, the comic book version would have probably let out like an exasperated sigh and then started fighting because he's just like, oh, we got to do this, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely strikes me as the kind who would be like, well, I mean, I guess I can get kind of sweaty and, oh man, I hope I don't fuck it up too badly.
Yeah. I mean, and we mentioned before, like, he's kind of let himself go. Like, he's still a big dude, but he's like kind of schlubby now and like hasn't really kept in shape and just has like a very quiet life where he meets with his friend, the original Night Owl, like once a week for beers and reminiscing. And that's like his whole life because he's set. Like his dad was, think they said he was like a stock market guy or something.
Something like that. Like, Dan's ridiculously rich and he doesn't ever need to do anything ever again.
And that's how he got all these cool gadgets. And he's also, traditional comic book genius of inventing things that don't actually exist in the real world just to have cool gadgets, which is, I'm fine with that trope. It's a good trope. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't have web shooters for Spider-Man. So I'm okay with that trope.
I'm glad that you approve of that trope.
I mean, tropes, they can be bad.
They can also be good.
Yeah. So later in the apartment, Dan and Laurie are watching TV together, and suddenly sparks start to fly. Oh. And Laurie goes to make her move, but Dan is just too not in the right headspace, and just can't get things moving along.
He can't get an erection, right? Is that what
that's what I'm okay. Trying to gently hint at. Thank you for spelling that out for me, Karen.
Anytime you want me to just get straight to the heart of the matter, you know.
But then we see this dream sequence, which is very Terminator 2 of the world being destroyed.
Anyone wanted me to talk about boners? You call 1-800-BONERS and I'll be there to talk about them.
Yep.
Dial now.
Dr. Porkenmeyer's Wiener Juice. Yes, that's that is a SNL skit from probably 15 years ago that you should definitely look into. Anyway, in his dream sequence, it's kind of a cool effect of they're them, but then when they peel away their real self, it shows underneath they're really their hero self. It's kind of showing in their own minds he can't really separate the superhero part of his brain from the mundane slacker dude that he's kind of become over the years. You get the sense that he really misses that, but then also the world gets destroyed by a giant nuclear explosion and he wakes up in a cold sweat. So it's not all good. And so he heads down to the basement naked, except then he puts on his goggles. They love the goggles in this issue. So do I. The goggles are there's a lot of close-ups of the goggles and point of view from the goggles and zooming out from the goggles having been really up close, and they're really they're really cool. The Dave Gibbons and John Higgins who did the colors, they really kind of play around with a lot of different things in this issue. It's really, really cool. I really like it. Yeah, that's one of the things that's very consistent through this book was Dave Gibbons' art is amazing all throughout.
100%.
It's very good. That was actually another interesting thing in that interview where he was talking about how he went from weekly deadlines for years to monthly. So he said, once I switched to monthly, it was super easy to be consistent and get everything in on time. And I'm man, that is good on him, because that is a super hard thing for anybody in a creative field to be punctual and also that deadlines. Freaking good at their job.
Yeah, and he seems really nice too.
Yeah. No, when he talked about Alan Moore at the end of that, you kind of felt oh man, this guy really wishes that they were still friends, but Alan Moore made that incredibly difficult. He's I think I did everything on my end to make our friendship work, and I'm just okay, that says a lot right there.
Oh yeah. That says to me he told me to go to hell, and I didn't want to, but kind of had to.
So back to the comic itself, I guess. So when Dan's discovered, standing around naked in his goggles, his fancy ass goggles, they decide to suit up and go on patrol, even though it's illegal right now because of the big 77 Senate hearings or whatever, where they made some new law where they couldn't do this anymore. And they suit up, they go in his airship, which is named Archie after the owl in Sword in the Stone, I believe is what he said it was.
I believe so, yes.
Which that's a I think highly underrated Disney movie, by the way. I do enjoy Sword in the Stone quite a bit. I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
I have not.
Okay, well, there's a wizard battle where it's Merlin and then there's this witch that he's kind of rivals with, and they have a very well animated sequence where they're turning into different animals to fight each other and stuff. It's pretty good. I would look that scene up if nothing else. So they go on patrol. They cruise over New York and notice a tenement fire, and they find this, like, all these people are trapped in there, so they're able to save everybody and get fly them to safety, give everyone hot cocoa, which is pretty good.
Very funny.
And then because he gets his self-confidence back, and, then they make sweet, sweet love inside of Archie. And then they decide to break Rorschach out of prison. And we're left with the closing quotation, "I am a brother to dragons and a companion to owls. My skin is black upon me, and my bones are burned with heat." Job chapter 3, verses 29 to 30. Another Bible deep dive for everyone out there.
Them deep cuts from the Bible. Mm-hmm. Shout out to the Bible.
So, so what did you think of issue 7?
I thought it was really good.
Yeah.
I have to be honest, out of all the characters in Watchmen, I find Dan to be not the most interesting, but one of the most interesting, but also kind of relatable, I guess. Not even really relatable, but sort of realistic, I suppose, in terms of like a superhero whose superhero life is now kind of behind him. Like, I feel like that's how a lot of people would be about it if superheroing was suddenly made illegal. He would kind of, he let himself go, and he's not really got a lot of confidence around it anymore. But when he does go out and do it again, he gains a lot of that confidence back and also gets like mad horny. So, I really enjoyed like kind of exploring his character, a little more. And the kind of progression, through the issue was really good as well. And I also really enjoyed the idea that like being a superhero was something that they do like to help people, but it was also like it's presented as kind of like an addiction, I guess, for them. Like it's something that they require to function on a certain level, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I didn't see it that way, but I definitely agree with you. Now that you've said it, I see the connection. I thought this one, it slowed things down a little bit, which I guess you kind of needed after all the crazy prison Rorschach stuff in the last episode or last issue was like 100%. Very, very intense. And this one kind of slowed things back down quite a bit. And I thought it was really a really well done character study for Night Owl, because you do get to see like it within just these few scenes of them, him and Laurie hanging out together. Just you get a lot of his personality and, like you said, that kind of lost dreams that he's been going through and dealing with. And it's like why he hasn't done anything really with his life since stopping being a hero, because he has all these resources and is super smart. It's like he could have done pretty much anything he wanted. It also kind of, I think, was there to show the contrast between him and Ozymandias, because we see scenes of Ozymandias like doing cool flips and gymnastic tricks on the TV and stuff. And then Dan, it's like he could do all that stuff back when he was in shape. He just never kept up with it, because you get the impression they're supposed to all be kind of around the same age, other than Laurie, who's, it kind of made a point to that she's younger, which is, Dr. Manhattan, should be in jail is my point.
Yep. He, 100% should be in jail.
So, you want to take, number 8?
I will, issue 8, Old Ghosts. Hollis Mason.
Spookiest issue of them all.
Yes, the spooky issue. Old Ghosts. When Hollis Mason, who's the original Night Owl, sees reports of the tenement rescue on the news, he ends up calling Sally Jupiter, who's the original Silk Spector, to kind of talk to her about it. So back at the basement hideout, Dan and Laurie investigate the possibility that Dr. Manhattan's choice to exile himself was carefully orchestrated as part of a bigger conspiracy. Mm-hmm. So then Dan kind of comes to the conclusion that breaking Rorschach out of prison it's really important now, because he may actually have information to help them uncover the larger conspiracy, what is actually going on.
Right.
And then we have a little scene where a police detective comes by Dan's apartment, and he's basically like, what if you're Night Owl? You're friends with people, right? And really just kind of implies like a lot of things that he's Night Owl and he's been in contact with Rorschach and Laurie and things like that. And so Dan's like, well, I guess we have to do this tonight because the cops are onto me and I don't want to go to jail.
Yeah, that one detective seems to be the only policeman in the entire series that is like a detective at all, like that knows how to do his job at all. It's that one dude.
Yeah. He's probably the only police officer in New York City at this point.
I mean, they did have riots over costumed heroes versus police. So.
Exactly.
The union decided he could keep his job and everyone else was fired, I guess.
That is exactly what happened. So now, so his face, he looks like he's probably like 45? Mm-hmm. Lies. He's actually only 21. He's aged so badly because he's got so much police work to do.
He's just that stressed.
Yeah. We get a little bit of a cutaway where we see a missing writer and a painter discussing a squid-like creature that one of them is sketching that is under a tarp being prepared to be transported on a beach in the distance. So that's just kind of a whatever could that be? But meanwhile, Dan and Laurie head off in Archie to go and spring Rorschach from prison where a riot has broken out because the guy that Rorschach dumped all the hot oil on, he did.
Yeah.
He died to the surprise of like literally nobody.
Right. They kind of tell Rorschach like, hey, they give him a warning. They're like, so that guy's in intensive care and is probably going to die. And once he does, we're starting this riot. Like he's pretty much told that by the other inmates. And I think it's something like 50 something dudes that he put in there personally. So
yes,
a lot of enemies locked in there. But remember, folks, they're locked in there with him.
Exactly. I have to say, like the movie is not good.
Yeah.
That scene in particular is executed much better in the film than it is in the comic.
Yes, the acting in the movie was actually fine. That wasn't the problem. The guy that plays Rorschach especially was really good at that role.
He was very good. But in any case, the movie aside.
Yes.
So Rorschach kicks the shit out of some people who came to his cell to kill him. Some old mob boss that they tangled with in the past, and he ends up, that classic Watchmen scene where he ties the guy's hands through when he tries to reach through the bars, and they have to kill him to get into the cell. And not that anyone notices because there's a giant riot taking place, and he electrocutes the other guy who comes into the cell to get him with the toilet water, which classic Rorschach deploying his toilet water. And so they all meet up back together and make their way out of the prison. I'm pretty sure that Rorschach kills the mob boss who wanted to kill him as well, but you don't actually see it, but it doesn't really matter. So while they're regrouping back at Dan's apartment, Dr. Manhattan appears out of nowhere and asks Laurie to come with him to Mars for an important conversation. And so the two of them teleport away as Dan and Rorschach flee the apartment with the police hot on their heels.
Does he tell her to get her ass to Mars?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
That is the response I was waiting for.
Yeah. So the news of Rorschach's escape angers and frightens a gang of knot tops who decide to go and take their frustrations on Hollis Mason, thinking that he is the night owl that the news reported that helped break Rorschach out. The gang forces their way into Mason's apartment and beats him to death. Mm-hmm. And the closing quote is, "On Halloween, the old ghosts come about us, and they speak to others they speak to some, and to others they are dumb." From Halloween by Eleanor Fairhion.
Yeah. So this issue is pretty well known, I would think, because like you said, that scene in the movie is one of the best scenes in the movie easily, and it's more,
they're like going down a corridor and like flipping and stuff, and like it's very stylized.
Yes, if you want a good action sequence, that has it. And how Rorschach is able to take out, several people way bigger than him is interesting. But more importantly, there's a lot of stuff on the side going on. Like, they're starting to set up things that are going to pay off way later, like the artists and stuff that are on this mysterious island and the mysterious creature they're talking about. And also those side characters that they like to keep going back to, like the newsstand guy and stuff. They keep making appearances. And we also get, I can't remember if this is the first time they're in it, but there's the like far right wing, crazy guy newspaper that he's always looking for a story to print, and he likes to print stuff about the heroes and how they're horrible and all this stuff. And he has this doofus guy that's always there, like as his assistant or whatever. And like that scene is just there to set up later how that guy's, when he can't fill a page, he just tells that guy to look through what they call the crank file, which is just crazy people sending in letters. And if they find something that's entertaining, they'll print it. So I thought that was interesting to see on a reread, like how early they start setting up, cause we're just past the halfway point, and that's going to pay off later. So it's nice because those characters play into showing a larger world of what's going on, but they also, are used to set up things that happen in the finale, which I thought was a really cool way to do that. Again, as we've mentioned, it's very well paced in very well plotted in the way like that it benefits from a reread. I also really liked in that Dave Gibbons interview how the original Night Owl was a design he drew when he was like 11 or 14 or something like that. Like, yeah, I thought that was really cool. Where he was like, well, we need an old timey looking guy for the original one. And he came up with Night Owl as a kid, thinking it was a cool sounding character. And you know what? It is a cool sounding character. I could totally see Night Owl just being a DC, like regular ass DC character. So he fits really well. It's also cool that they show like the trick or treater thing. Like it's all around Halloween. So it's like the monsters are out to play. It's kind of a theme that's happening, especially with Rorschach getting back out into the real world, getting out of prison, and how the old Night Owl only answers the door in the first place because he thinks it's trick or treaters. And that is definitely one thing that was different. Like in it's showing him like punching out these, old villains and stuff in his old costume. And it's cutting away to him basically being beaten to death. But in the movie, they show him getting in a bunch of good hits while this is happening, and then he loses. That's not exactly how it goes down here. Like, he's imagining that he's getting in these good punches, but he's kind of not in the comic book. Which I thought was a notable difference of trying to make it cool, But yeah, overall, I thought this one was pretty cool. What did you think? Yeah, it was. I mean, yeah, I don't really have anything else to add. It's probably one of the most well-known parts of the whole thing, simply because of the prison scene. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there wasn't anything particularly deep going on, but I mean, it's all, yeah. I mean, there's only so many times we can say it's good. It's well paced and it's well written. So yeah. There's also, I have to point out one thing real quick though, because there's because of the nature of comicsology, I could never tell if the like long series of prose sections were like the beginning of the next book or the end of the book you're on. You know what I mean? Yeah. So this one has like the newspaper thing that you see them talking about in the issue. Oh, yeah. So I assume this one was the New Frontiersman. Yeah. And this also had a ridiculous over the top like parody of like a political cartoon where like the American Superman's hands are tied by, the hippies and stuff. But the best part is the crying Statue of Liberty in the corner, which is 100%. If you've ever read the Onion's political cartoons, that is in every single one of those. So I died laughing when I came across this on this read through because I was not expecting that. It is very, very good. All right. So let's go on to chapter 9. All right. So chapter 9 is The Darkness of Mere Being. Dr. Manhattan and Laurie have teleported to Mars, and he soon remembers, oh yeah, humans need to breathe. So he puts this crazy bubble thing around her so that she doesn't suffocate to death. And then he escorts her to the Crystal Palace that we saw him building in the other issue. We start to learn more about Dr. Manhattan's clairvoyant abilities, and they have this big discussion, Laurie and Dr. Manhattan, about how she's like, well, if you already know how this conversation's going to go, like, why do we even have to have it? But then when she says, like, oh, you know, Dan and I slept together, he's still shocked. So we get the impression, like, he experiences time, which we talked about a little bit before. It's like he experiences everything that's ever happened to him simultaneously. But it's like he can't access the information at will, it seems like. It seems like he just kind of starts rambling and is like, oh, this stuff happened. And then you tell me this. And then she tells him that like 5 minutes later. And he's like, what?
It's almost like he's aware that it is going to happen, but he is physically incapable of like processing or reacting to it, which is really interesting because he's not exactly a emotive guy anyway. You know, he can say stuff like, oh, you're going to tell me that you and Dan are sleeping together. But he seems incapable of actually registering that that's like information. Whereas to other people, it's like, I've just dropped this massive bombshell on you and I seemingly don't care. But I think it's like almost like a physical thing that he can't until it actually happens. Right. Which is super interesting. Because we do see him show emotion once she actually says it out loud. Which is, you don't see him show emotion very often, and usually only related to Laurie, which is, again, with that whole his one connection to humanity thing that they've been talking about. And he tells her, you know, this whole encounter is going to end in tears and this and that. And she's like, you know, you're wrong because I have dry eyes. And then she gets to, you know, see kind of like a vision of her past, and it's all bad. She sees her mom and stepdad arguing over her mother having an affair, and it's yet another very messed up relationship that one of the heroes comes from. And it's all bad for all of these characters. It feels like. Yep. So she pleads with John which is Dr. Manhattan's real name, to end the conversation and come back to Earth to save humanity from Armageddon. And he basically is like, well, the end of humanity means the end of suffering. So why would I want to stop that? Because he sees no difference in, you know, like the beauty of Mars, even though it has no life, it has these really cool landscapes and stuff. And he's like, on an atomic level, like, how are these any different? Yeah. So like, oof, cold. Yeah. So we also see, this, second flashback now to, Laurie at a mask get together, at her mother's house. And when she's a teenager, and, she she witnesses Mothman, which they've mentioned before. He's the one that has a mental breakdown. And, I think they've like kind of in passing said that he was, committed or something, like in one of the earlier scenes. And, so that it just kind of is showing like a lot of the people doing this are not, necessarily the most stable people in the world. Like, you would have to kind of not be, you know, I mean, yeah, like it's very much like a full extension and realistic application, like, of that idea. Like, you know, when they say things like, you know, Batman's a bit crazy, or, you know, if you want to be a superhero, you got to be a bit crazy. It's like, well, I mean, this is kind of like the extreme realistic end of that, is that if you become a mass superhero, like, you are legitimately a little bit messed up in the head. So. Yeah. So she asks her mom, like, hey, is this all I have to look forward to? Because this shows her, like, she's been training and stuff, because her mom's kind of grooming her to be a hero. She's like, so is this all I'm going to have to look forward to, is growing old and, you know, being all beat up or going insane? And, you know, it's just one of those, it's not good.
She also encounters the comedian, and she's kind of being flirty with him, and her mom, of course, pulls her away immediately and forbids her from ever speaking to him again for obvious reasons. As we discussed in the last episode, this is the guy that attempted to rape her. So, good on the mom for, immediately stopping that encounter from happening.
Oh, yes.
So back on Mars, this is where Dr. Manhattan kind of tells her about the human condition not being any more spectacular than, these cool landscapes he sees. And, they kind of go back and forth arguing over how she's like, how can you not see, that humanity is like this special thing in the universe? And he's like, well, you're not seeing my perspective that it's not, So it's an interesting argument, though, from his point of view, because as humans, we are like, no, human life is precious, but to something that was on a different plane of existence, essentially, like, how would you convince that being that was also an intelligent being that humanity is worth having in the universe? It's an interesting conundrum to think about.
It is.
It gets deep in this issue. So this is a pretty key point in the story, because this is where Laurie realizes that the comedian is actually her real father, and she goes into a fit of rage and is basically screaming like anybody but him. And she's like so emotionally distraught that the palace actually starts collapsing around them, the Crystal Palace they've been flying around Mars in. And this is actually what convinces John to see her side of things, because he says, if you can be the product of such improbable circumstances where these two people who should have never hooked up after everything they had been through and everything he had done to, her mom and stuff in the first place, that her birth is a miracle in the same way that these landscapes that he was waxing poetic about earlier were a miracle. And if she's that way, then the rest of humanity would have to be as well. So every human life is a tiny miracle. So that's how he's convinced, like, maybe humans aren't so bad. I mean, they're terrible, but maybe I shouldn't just let them destroy themselves. So they decide to go back to Earth together. And we're left with the closing quotation. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light of meaning in the darkness of mere being. C.G. Jung, from Memories, Dreams, Reflections. So what did you think of Watchmen number 9?
Much like the other Mars-based Dr. Manhattan-centric issue, this is probably one of my favorite issues. Simply because it is so well written. Like Dr. Manhattan's perception of time, as I said before, I find it very interesting. But the interplay between him and Laurie about the nature of the human condition and, how or why human life should be valued at all is just really interesting, and it was really well constructed. And, the kind of the interplay between the two, of her being by far and away the most, emotional character, and him being by far and away the least emotional character. The two of them kind of having this, debate, essentially, was just like some really excellent pairing of characters to kind of have this conversation. If you had like Dr. Manhattan and Night Owl, someone who was able to, maybe get on that same kind of logical level as Dr. Manhattan, but I don't think it would have worked as well. Whereas I think in this case, having someone who's like so high emotion and someone who is so low, it just makes for a very interesting dynamic. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I thought this issue was excellent. I thought it was really, 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 really well done. And I think the kind of like the ideas presented and the level of sophistication in the writing and the arguments presented, not by the characters, but the arguments presented by the writer, by Alan Moore, by the things that are presented in here, are the kinds of things in Watchmen and the kinds of things that Watchmen talks about that makes me understand why it is so acclaimed and why it has made so many, top graphic novel lists and top book lists and things like that. Because, irrespective of any other problems I may have with it, and I've said this before, but I'm going to fucking say it again, and I'll probably say it again at the end. Watchmen's really fucking well written.
Yeah.
And it has just that extra level of clarity to it that I think is really on display in this issue. So full marks for this one.
Yeah. And our good old friend, the smiley face, is back at the end of this issue. Because I think
that was weird.
Yeah, we had kind of made a joke about how it became like the symbol for everything Watchmen. And even Dave Gibbons kind of was saying, like, we made the comedian and he's this dark militaristic character. So how do we make him like a comedian? And he said he was a comedian in the way like Groucho Marx was, like satirical, but very dry. And so it was kind of like, that was more their inspiration, because they definitely wanted to steer clear of like making him the Joker. He specifically said in that interview.
Yeah. He's like, we've already done clowns. We don't want to do it again.
Yes. Yeah. So the little like smiley face symbol was purposely made very cartoony to stand out against his, the rest of his various costumes throughout the different years.
Soldier gimp suit.
Yes, his soldier gimp suit. So I thought it was interesting that once she realizes this connection and it zooms out, it's there. For some reason, where the Crystal Palace fell apart was inside this crater that just looks like that smiley face. But also the shattered crystal makes it look like the blood drop mark. It's visual.
Like Dave Gibbons is really good at his job or something.
It's very visually interesting. It like didn't seem 100% necessary, but he knows what he's doing. I liked it. It's kind of goofy, but in a good way, I would say.
Yeah.
All right. So do you want to take us into issue 10?
All right. Issue 10. Two riders were approaching. So as Russian tanks mass along the East German border, President Nixon and Vice President Ford head deep inside a government emergency bunker. Meanwhile, before continuing their investigation, Rorschach and Night Owl head back to Rorschach's apartment to pick up his spare costume and journal. And in Antarctica, Adrian Veidt, who is Ozymandias, arrives at his Arctic retreat. He informs his associates that the delivery was successful, and he studies his wall of television and divulges from the broadcast that everything he's seeing means that war is inevitable. Meanwhile, Rorschach and Night Owl argue whether they should be looking for a mask killer or trying to uncover why somebody killed the comedian because he found out the plot to get rid of Dr. Manhattan. After a few outbursts, they agree that either way, the next course of action is to interrogate some of the criminal element to try and uncover some leads. Rorschach leads Night Owl to a bar where he usually shakes down criminals to get information. They soon find out that it was a freight coordinator at Pyramid Industries who paid for the hit on Adrian Veidt. But the go-between who carried the money was never told who the contract was on. Before leaving, Night Owl finds out accidentally from a knot top that Hollis Mason is dead. They then head to Veidt's office to give him the news and convince him to help them. I'm going to talk about when they have their like little argument about what they're going to do next. That is the one time that Rorschach is vaguely contrite for his
human.
A human, yeah.
He's like the only time he has any sense of empathy for any other human being in the world, like where he's not being a complete sociopath.
Pretty much. And it takes Night Owl basically saying, who the hell do you think you are? You live off people while insulting them. Nobody complains because I think you're a goddamn lunatic. Do you know how hard it is being your friend? And he's just like, yeah, you're a good friend. I know that. I'm sorry that it's sometimes difficult. And he just immediately forgives him. Yeah. And it's like, nah, push him in the river, mate.
As much as like Rorschach doesn't deserve his forgiveness, I still really liked that scene. Like where it actually kind of humanized Rorschach as much of a piece of shit as he is as a person. It's like, okay, well, I don't know. It just makes me like Dan's character even more, I guess, that he finally told this guy off and was like, you know, we're supposed to be friends and you are an incredibly shitty friend. And he's like, whoa, you're right. I'm sorry.
And then because Dan is an even better friend, he's like, you know what? That's okay.
Yeah.
I forgive you. We're still friends.
It's like when you forgave me for dragging you earlier unintentionally.
And honestly, you know what that proves to me? If Dan is capable of standing up to Rorschach, who is like literally a sociopathic murderer, I think that if Dan had been born 20 years later and had anti-anxiety meds and believed in himself more, he could have kicked a whole lot of ass.
Oh,
He could have owned that place.
Yeah.
Because, he's obviously very strong inside. But anyway, somewhere on the ocean, comic book writer Max Shea and painter Hira Manish, who we saw on the beach earlier discussing a squid like monster, are getting intimate in the hold of a ship, which means they're having sex, in case anyone's curious about that.
More boners.
They're happy to... Yeah, more boners, yeah. Again, that number is 1-800-BONERS. I will talk about them if you like. So they're happy to be finally leaving the island and be done with the super secret movie they were paid to work on. Until Shea notices a bomb under a tarp seconds before it explodes, destroying the ship completely. Oops. Veidt is not in his office when Rorschach and Night Owl arrive. They find an appointment book which reads Veidt left for a place named Karnak. On a hunch, Night Owl hacks into the computer system and finds out Pyramid Industries is one of Veidt's companies. They realize that Karnak must be what Veidt calls his Antarctic retreat and head off to confront him. Before leaving, Rorschach makes one final journal entry detailing Veidt's role in the plot and drops it into a mailbox. When Rorschach arrives at the New Frontiersman newspaper office, it is immediately thrown onto the crank file before being read.
Yep.
Which I thought was very funny. After Rorschach and Night Owl land Archie in Antarctica, they head to Veidt's retreat. Veidt, through the eyes of his surveillance cameras, witnesses their approach. And our closing quote is, outside in the distance, a wild cat did growl. 2 riders were approaching. The wind began to howl. Which is from All Along the Watchtower by Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
What'd you reckon on this one?
I think this one is where things are kind of starting to heat up quite a bit in interesting ways, because we already saw the wrap up of the whole the comedian being Laurie's father, which was a cool reveal in the last one. This one, this is the reveal of Veidt being a horrible monster, because we see his assistants that have basically helped him construct his big plan. Early on, we get to see him being like, hey, we're all going to celebrate together. And then him killing them all by having them drink wine until they pass out or drugging it or something. And then basically just opening this arboretum area into the Arctic.
Yeah. And just
they all
freezing them.
Yeah, it's very messed up. And like we were talking about earlier, the interplay with Dan and Rorschach was really cool, where he finally stands up to him, and just really good character work in this one. And I really, really enjoyed that. Also, again, one of those scenes, I don't even remember the scenes when I first read it of the setup to the big reveal at the end, where it's like, oh, well, these artists and stuff are working on this crazy project, and then they all get killed off. Because I think that was another one of those just get to the main characters stuff when I was reading it. Much like the Black Freighter stuff was that way for me the first time, but this time I knew there was a payoff to the Black Riders. What is it called? The
Black Freighter.
Yeah, Black Freighter. What did I say? Black Rider?
Yeah.
Assassin's Creed Black Flag, that had this full payoff. And that had some pretty cool scenes in it too, of him finally making it to shore, and he thinks the town's already been taken over, so he kills this money lender, because he's like, oh, well, if he's out here with on a tryst with this random woman, then clearly they're in on it, because otherwise they wouldn't have let him live.
Yeah. There's no way he would have gotten out of the town without some pirate assistance.
Right.
I should kill them.
And also, you see him, he's trying to sneak back into the town. So he's trying to sneak past what he thinks is a guard. And it's you see that it's a scarecrow and stuff. It's got some really cool visuals in it. And I really enjoyed that whole subplot that was going on. I also did the the thing where like they try and fly Archie into the Antarctic and they get pretty far, but they freeze the engine completely by flying into this area. It's like it's designed to fly around in a city, not in the Antarctic. So
yeah,
I thought that was an interesting touch.
Dan also says at one point, there you go. I had him soaking on a riverbed yesterday,
right?
And then I bring him straight into sub-zero temperatures. Why didn't I think? And it's just like, fuck, that's such a just human mistake to be like, yeah, it'll be fine if I just like fly this into the Antarctic.
Yeah, it's full of water. The engine's full of water still, you know, it's fine.
Yeah, it's all good. Sub-zero temperatures, who cares?
Yeah. It's one of those subtle touches too that I think you probably wouldn't, like a lot of writers might not even think about, like,
yeah,
oh, they were hiding here and now they're flying over here. And it's like, well, the ship is waterlogged, so it makes sense that it would completely freeze up.
That it would completely freeze.
So yeah, it was a nice touch. Overall, I think this is where the book's really like pushing forward quickly.
It kicks off. Yeah.
Yeah. So we only got 2 more to go. So, do you have anything else on this one before we move on?
The very last note that I'll say is that the snowsuit that Dan has for a Night Owl, like the big white suit, looks comfy as hell.
Also completely ridiculous, but yes, I would love that to cuddle up on the couch and just, you know, marathon something on Netflix, you know, that's,
yeah. It's like he's wearing a giant owl-shaped Snuggie with like the little holes in the front.
For his arms to come out. Also, like Rorschach is a dumbass because he's in the Antarctic and he's like, no, I'm fine. I just need my overcoat. It's like, he would have frozen to death. Come on.
He's like, do you want something a little fine like this? It's like, no, you're not. It's like the Antarctic is literally below freezing. Like at all times, you would freeze to death very quickly.
His entire body has frostbite by the time they get where they're going.
Oh yeah, because he's only wearing like a coat. I mean, he's wearing gloves and like pants and stuff. He's got a scarf.
But this is the stuff he comfortably wears around New York City all year round.
Yeah,
and sure, he sweats like a pig in the summer because
I'm sure he stinks
because they've mentioned how bad he smells many times.
Oh yeah, Rorschach, great detective, sociopath, smells like ass.
Yeah,
all the time.
All right. So, Watchmen number 11, Look on My Works, Ye Mighty. So this one starts with Rorschach and Night Owl approaching Veet's Antarctic retreat, and they're discussing whether or not their old chum, you know, that was a crime-fighting dude back in the day with them, would have turned into a world destroyer. Like, is he the kind of person who would flip a switch like that and suddenly want to destroy everything? Inside, Ozymandias gets up from his bank of television monitors, which is one of those completely hilarious and ridiculous, like, supervillain tropey things that I liked a lot in this because it was so stupid.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's like, I'm so smart, I can watch like 300 channels at the same time and absorb all this information.
You're full of shit.
Yeah, it was very good.
You pay for too much cable.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's one of those tropey as hell again, but playing on it in a way that I'm like, yeah, this is fine. This works for me.
I have 45 Netflix accounts and I've got so much to catch up on.
Oh yeah. So, he's watching those with his, weird cat monster thing, who I would love to give pets to, by the way, because that thing is adorable.
That thing is very adorable. Also, the other thing that just occurred to me, the idea that every single one of these screens is displaying something useful is complete horseshit.
Yeah.
Like, he's got to be watching just like the most garbage TV.
Mm-hmm. There'd be so many ads. And
oh, yeah. And someone's like, Adrian, what's the geopolitical landscape right now? And he's like, I don't know, but let me tell you about the latest season of Cake Boss. Like, I can tell you all about that.
Also, remember this came out in the 80s, 1987, and cable was pretty rare, if at all, at this point. So
he had cable.
He had to have had cable if it was a thing. I can't remember when cable was a thing, but we definitely had it
in
when
the
I was
Antarctic
a kid.
As well.
Yeah, they ran that cable all the way there. I mean, satellite dishes. That was a thing.
Oh,
so
okay, right.
I forgot about satellite dishes. Those were very useful for people who liked to pirate channels, because apparently back in the day, all channels were just beamed off. So you could get, I mean, I never had one or anything, but I've heard stories of people getting like Japanese TV and like Mexican TV and Canadian TV if like you were in the right position because you could just grab all these signals and watch them. And it turned out other channels that wanted to charge for their programming didn't like that so much.
Yeah.
Like HBO came along, didn't want that to be a thing for some reason. So yes, he's watching the screens, and then we see him switch a time gauge on that says Eastern Standard Time, 11:25. He pushes a button and starts communicating to his former associates that are. Oh no, this is I jumped ahead. This is actually the scene where he murders all of his dudes. I was thinking that was in the last one.
You did actually say he does it later.
Oh, did I? Okay. So this is the scene where he's like, hey, chums, come on in here and let's celebrate our victory. And then murders everybody.
Let's celebrate with a finest bottle of poisoned wine.
Yeah. So he recounts to all of his friends that he's about to murder his life story. So this is where we get all his backstory stuff, which is funny that it's
Freudian slip that was.
What's that?
What I said, what a Freudian slip that was. He's about to murder his life story.
Oh, wow. I totally didn't catch that I said that. That's good. Yeah, so he, wow, I'm gonna have to recover from that one somehow. Anyway, so he talks about how he came from these rich parents, but he wanted to, and they died when he was very young, but he wanted to be a self-made man. So he gave away all his fortune and then built up his own stuff over time. He traveled through the Middle East and Africa and Asia and retraced the steps of his hero, Alexander the Great. And on his way back is when he adopted the name of Ozymandias, which was the Greek name for Pharaoh Ramses II, which is why he's obsessed with all the Egyptian mythology stuff, and his company is Pyramid, and there's lots of Egyptian styled artifacts and whatnot around all of his buildings and things that he's obsessed with. And yeah, he started his career as a costume hero because he was trying to fight the evils of the world. And this is when we find out that he's poisoned everybody and then opens the dome and murders everybody. So if they weren't dead yet, they are now. And it's such a cool drawing too of like the arboretum that they're all like celebrating in, because it's the Antarctic, but he's built this cool dome and there's like a rainforest in it and there's butterflies and birds and it's very serene. And then he's just like, well, this is all dead, and just opens the dome and all of that gets blown away immediately into the snow. Which, you know, those poor butterflies.
R.I.P.
Yeah. So meanwhile, Rorschach and Night Owl have found a way in, and they try and surprise Veet, like do a surprise attack, but he's in ridiculous shape. Like they kind of keep making a point to show like he's this like what is it, Atlas or whatever, like the statue where he's just like the perfect man, where he's just like super ripped and stuff.
He's ripped as hell. He
just mops the floor with both of them. And
like multiple times.
Yeah, they can't even get a punch in. And he talks about how, you know, when they first tried to meet and start the Crime Busters, not the Watchmen, because there is never a group called the Watchmen.
No, there is not.
There is a much more hilariously named Crime Busters. And during that meeting, the comedian basically said, you know, this is stupid and pointless, and he burns the map where they've been doing all their research on like high crime areas, and says, you know, Ozymandias is going to be the smartest man on the cinder because we're all going to die in a nuclear holocaust anyway. So basically the comedian, of all people, is who convinced Ozymandias by his speech, like, you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe humanity can't save itself. So who knew that the like massively roided out meathead like sociopath that was the comedian would be the guy to convince the smartest man in the world to devise a overly elaborate scheme to bring humanity together. But you know,
I don't know. I think he maybe was just looking for an excuse.
Yeah. Well, you know,
any excuse to get my plot on.
Yep. So, you know, he, being the smartest man, had realized that with the Cold War escalating, that the military would deadlock at some point, and it would eventually lead to a final conflict that would destroy all of humanity. So he formulated this massive hoax to get the world to believe that there was a threat of alien invasion, and also from like possibly other dimensions. Like he's doing all this weird stuff to mask it from Dr. Manhattan and also make it so like it's kind of untraceable where it's supposed to have come from. But he knew that and this whole thing was to get them to, all of humanity's governments to, unite, because there's this bigger threat that will wipe them all out. So they have to come to terms with, having peace through all the nations and whatnot, and, fighting potential alien invasion. But he knew Dr. Manhattan would, figure this out and stop him. So that's why all this crazy stuff was just an elaborate scheme to get Dr. Manhattan to leave. So it was him who gave everyone cancer, not Dr. Manhattan. They're all people who worked for him, so I guess he put something in the water. I don't know if they actually...
He gave them all cell phones.
Oh, yes. Early cell phones, You ever see that thing where they, like, fry an egg between two old cell phones with the radiation? That's what he did.
These ones are worse because it was actually just a block of uranium with numbers on it.
Yeah, with a fake antenna.
The reception is terrible, but these tumors are very impressive.
So with the comedians had spotted Veit's uncharted island, and that's why he had to put him out of his misery. So he thought that Blake, who is the comedian, would expose the plot. And that also explains why the comedian in his last moments had shown up like at Moloch's, because he had seen his name on the list and was crying. Yeah. And like, it completely broke him to see that there was this whole world ending plot that he was trying to put out. And then he had even orchestrated his own assassination attempt, specifically just to throw Rorschach off his scent. He thought about lots of things, except for the fact that, in my opinion, humanity would quickly be like, there's probably not going to be more aliens, and then stop being friends very quickly after this. But, whatever, it's fine.
And just a small spoiler for Doomsday Clock. That's literally what happens in the first, 2 pages.
Oh, yeah. I think I saw the preview picture of that.
Yeah, the first recap at the start of Doomsday Clock is so this thing happened, everyone united for 30 seconds, and then they just immediately turned on each other, because why would you cooperate if the aliens are just going to come kill you?
Yeah, that's a problem. His, one of the things they had been researching was teleportation and stuff. Cause with Dr. Manhattan's advancements, he was able to use his super genius with Dr. Manhattan. And so they teleport that crazy weird ass squid alien into the middle of New York and kill tons of people. And, we find out that when he's done monologuing and Night Owl is like, we're going to stop you. He's like, do you think I would have told you my plan if there was even a remote chance that you would be able to stop me? I did this 35 minutes ago. And that is another one of those lines from this book that you're just like, damn, that's a good line.
Yeah. Do you seriously think I'd explain my masterstroke if there remained the slightest chance of you affecting its outcome? I did it 35 minutes ago. It's shit.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah. And we're left with the closing quotation. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. From Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley. And, what did you think of the big reveal for issue 11?
I'm trying to think back to the first time that I read it, and it was super fresh. Mm-hmm. Because obviously this, this time that I was reading it, I knew what was going to happen, because I think I knew it was Ozymandias from the start. I remember it at least that much. But I think remembering the first time that I read it, I was like, oh, damn, it was Ozymandias, and then, he what? And I think, honestly, I was too young to actually understand what the fuck his plan was supposed to be. Right. I don't think I followed it very well. Because I remember being really confused about, what was going on. So this time, while the surprise of I was Ozymandias the whole time wasn't really there. Like that, I remember the level of detail in the plan was very impressive.
Yeah.
And I was like, damn, this is really is very intricate. And especially reading it for the show and going back through with all the recaps and things like that, it's really interesting how much has been set up prior to all of this.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like when I first read this, would have been like 10-ish years ago. I didn't see it coming, but I was also, I mentioned, I was kind of rushing through it because I just wanted to I need to see how this book ends. So it was one of those, I read it in one sitting. Yeah. And I think I definitely should have probably reread it back then to really get it. Because I also was I was reading it fast enough that I had even missed some of the clues about the comedian being Laurie's father and that whole story arc where when you reread it, you're like, oh, all the puzzle pieces were there. You just had to put them together. And same with his plan. It's there's all these little side things like the artists and stuff on the island and the fake movie thing they're making. And it's all set up very well. And the big reveal is weird and comic booky and very, very good. I actually enjoyed it knowing what it was. I think I actually enjoyed it more because I was looking for the setup and it's done so well that I really just enjoyed the journey,
Yeah.
So that's going to take us to the last one, issue 12. And, that's you.
So that'll take us into issue 12, which is A Stronger, Loving World. Midnight, November 2nd, 1985. Most of New York City has been devastated by the psychic trauma caused by the instant death of Ozymandias' teleported alien. Dr. Manhattan and a heavily distraught Laurie tour the devastation. After they've seen enough, the two teleport away to the South Pole to follow a trail of tachyon particles that Dr. Manhattan senses will lead to the source of the disturbance. Meanwhile, inside his Antarctic retreat, Ozymandias continues to detail his hoax invasion plan to Rorschach and a disbelieving Night Owl. He tells him that in order to save humanity from self-destruction, he cloned the brain of a powerful psychic. By the way, psychics apparently exist in this world now. That was the
one thing where I was like, wait a minute. They've clearly said there aren't other superpowered people except for Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah. Yep. That's the only point of the story that I was like, okay, you did not set this up at all, but it's fine. Because he then had geneticists make it that much bigger and more powerful. Programmed into the brain were horrifying images of aliens.
Pump the brakes for 1 second. This means Alan Moore thinks psychics are real, right?
Oh, shit. Yeah, he totally does. He thinks psychics are real.
Okay. That makes so much more sense. Okay, let's move on.
Okay, yeah, all right. So programmed into the brain were horrifying images of aliens so that the mental transmissions given off at its death would affect anyone around it who managed to survive the initial psychic blast. This event would force all humans to end their petty wars and unite against a new, more terrifying alien enemy. After viewing the media coverage of the aftermath of the disaster, Ozymandias revels in his victory and convinces the masks that exposing the truth would plunge humanity back into its self-destructive course. They agree to keep the secret of who caused the alien and the murder of countless innocents in order to keep the peace. But Rorschach obviously does not fuck with that and decides to try and tell the world. Dr. Manhattan then makes him explode. Outside, not in front of everybody. That would be gross. With the crisis over, Laurie and Dan, who have assumed new identities, visit Laurie's mother. Laurie tells her mother that she knows Edward Blake the comedian is her real dad, and that she has come to terms with that fact, and bears no grudge. In the end, the previously ignored journal of Rorschach is possibly picked up to be read by the newspaper he sent it into. And our closing quote is, "It would be a stronger world, a stronger loving world to die in," by John Cale from Sanities. Mm-hmm. And that's the end of Watchmen.
Yep. And I guess we'll do our thoughts on this one and final thoughts. So this issue in particular I thought it was cool that we get the big reveal and then there's a whole next issue, because I would think in most modern books, it'd be like, kaboom, the next reveal. Okay, now you got to pick up the next giant crossover event to find out what the hell is going on. And since Watchmen is a standalone thing, you actually get to have the similar arc to an actual, you know, like a novel, a prose novel where it has like the climax and then the resolution afterwards where you actually get some breathing room, which is awesome because I feel like you don't get that in comics very often, if at all.
No.
And it kind of is a shame.
Yeah, I have to say that was one of my biggest problems with DC Metal, actually. To reference something else that we've reviewed, is that I enjoyed the story and I enjoyed the event, but the aftermath immediately afterwards, where it was like, and you know, here's the big results of everything that happened. There was like 2 seconds of downtime, and they were just immediately into the next thing. So this very last issue, after all of the or after all the stuff, is really excellent.
And this had one of the things I kind of had forgotten when we were talking about the last one is all those side characters in New York are all caught in that blast. So you've gotten to know these like little side characters in these vignettes about like the newsstand, and there's different characters that'll kind of come and go. And you even like see Rorschach's former psychiatrist from the prison again, like him and his wife are like kind of discussing like trying to make amends or whatever. And then like the end of the world happens, and it just kind of shocking.
They just die.
Yeah, everyone that you met that wasn't one of these core heroes, and even some of them, obviously, because Rorschach gets exploded. It's kind of crazy. Like I wasn't expecting that. I had completely forgotten about that scene, so I was kind of shocked when that one rolled around. And honestly, Rorschach's death, as much as a piece of garbage of a person as he is, it still like has emotional impact. Like you still feel bad for Rorschach for getting exploded, because as much of a terrible, terrible person as he is, like he actually is trying to like save the world in his own weird way. Like he gets like, this is not going to solve the world's problems permanently.
Yeah.
Like he's the only one that sees that, which is weird because he's got such a skewed perspective on justice and life and everything that even Lori and Dan are just like, she's just like so shocked by everything that she's just like, I need you to like hold me and be with me, and like nothing makes sense anymore. Let's just be together for right now while we're still alive. Yeah. And that's kind of the wrap up to their story, is just them getting it on the, you know, bare rug carpet in Ozymandias' pool lounge area. And Dr. Manhattan like walks in on them, and he just kind of smiles and is like, hey, they're happy. Lori's happy. So I can move on. Like, which I was kind of surprised. Like that was the end of that arc, was him just being like, hey, you know what? Maybe I don't need this connection to humanity. Maybe I can understand life on my own terms.
Well, he does. He actually leaves like after that.
And then he leaves Earth and he says, you know, hey, I think I might try and create some life. And then he leaves. And it's like, I think they all had cool endings to their, not cool. They all had
good endings?
Endings that they felt earned for the ones that were like in a slightly happier place. Obviously, like Dr. Manhattan's is in a better place than most people because he can just fuck off to another universe and doesn't have to deal with any of this stuff. Like Ozymandias is happy because he succeeded, and it's also rare that you see a super villain succeed in their plan, which I thought was kind of interesting because that's a thing you just, especially up to this point in comics, which is, I think, another reason this one stood out so much, was like the villain wins and everyone just has to deal with the aftermath. And for the most part, what we're left with is the aftermath is the world's a better place, at least for a little while. And, but it, you know, millions of people died, so that's no good. He's not necessarily justified in his insanity.
Yeah, he's not necessarily justified, and he's not even necessarily going to be correct in the long term. No, but you can maybe understand where he's coming from, right? And he succeeds, and it's it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, my final thoughts on Watchmen. I mentioned in the last episode, I came into this book with a huge chip on my shoulder, like not expecting it to hold up as well as I'm like, oh, I remember really liking this, but I was a lot younger and it had been really built up and it's still held in such high regard. And, you know, sometimes you go back to those 80s era books and you're just like, oh boy, this does not work anymore at all. And yes, we've talked about there's definitely some problematic stuff in this, and it's not perfect, but I would say it is definitely still an incredibly important work, and I think comic fans should still go back and read it. I actually think if you're new to comics and just getting into them, I think this is a good jumping on point for I think it's a lot of people's jumping on point because it's a single volume. It's easily available everywhere because it's been reprinted like ad infinitum, you know, like just
23 times.
23 times. Yeah, that's insane. And I think it holds up incredibly well and tells a really interesting story. It's incredibly well paced. The art is amazing. It's definitely worth going back to. What do you think, Kieran?
I as we discussed, there are some things in the in the start of the book that I think are a little yeah. And I think, like you, I also came into Watchmen with a huge chip on my shoulder. A big ass salt and vinegar chip as well, because I think I remember finding the first issue like, you know, overwritten, really stupid, and I was like, yeah, whatever. You know, I remember this being
you were really a rowdy teen, and I
mean, yeah, basically, I was being a rowdy teen at 25 reading a fucking comic book.
Uh-huh.
But I think actually going through the whole thing, after having read a whole bunch of other comics and being like 10 years older as well, do I think Watchmen is like the best comic ever written and like the only comic deserving of being on like, you know, the New York Times top 100 novels of the 20th century kind of thing? No, I don't think so. I think there are other comics that are just as good and other comics that display the strengths of the medium just as well, you know, in different genres and different ways. Do I think that Watchmen is one of the most important comics, or at least one of the most important Western comics ever written? 100%. And if you are at all interested in comics, you have to read Watchmen. I would say it's one of those things where it's like, you know, people say like, oh, you have to read Watchmen. Like, you know, it's required reading. Like it actually is required reading. Yeah. I would say, because it's such a, it's
so influential.
It's so influential, and like you can, it's actually interesting. It's actually interesting. No, it's interesting in that it's one of those things where I have found so often, especially going back and reading and watching and consuming like older media, especially stuff from the 80s, that there are a lot of things that I've finally gone around to checking out that I've been told are really influential, that have since been gone on to be surpassed by the things that they've influenced.
Mm-hmm.
So like I've always found things like Blade Runner is a really good example. When I finally got around to watching Blade Runner, I could see how it was so influential and how at the time it would have been super mind-blowing and really groundbreaking because it did so many fresh new things. It has since, I think, been surpassed by other sci-fi. So it no longer presents particularly interesting or original ideas. In the case of Watchmen, I think the things that it has presented and the things that it did new and in an original way were not picked up on at the time.
Yeah.
In the correct way. Like Dave Gibbons said, I'm sorry that you had to read all these like dark, edgy comics. I don't think that's not what they were really going for. They were just trying to do something different and present like a different style. Whereas I think what would have been great that if people had picked up on, instead of the whole dark grittiness and kind of run with that, is if instead they had actually realized that comics could be used to tell interesting, mature stories.
Right.
They didn't necessarily have to be dark and gritty and full of like dog murder or anything or you know.
Hey, now JoJo's is still good.
Yeah. and, you know, horrible crimes and, you know, the heroes having, you know.
Oh, my dark past.
My dark past kind of thing. Like, you know, but instead realizing that you could use comics as a way to tell really sort of interesting kind of, you know, quote unquote grown up stories, because, you know, I'm going to say it for the billionth time. Watchmen is really well written, and the art is really, really well done. You know, it's I can understand why it's on so many lists as a really good book rather than, you know, it's a comic book, because everything about it is so skillfully done.
Yeah.
And I think now you have a lot more comics that are, you know, really high quality and presenting, you know, mature stories and things like that in a good way. And we're kind of finally moving away from those like gritty stories.
I also think it helps that it was published by, it helps that it's because it was published by such a major publisher back in the day, whereas a lot of stuff that do tackle themes of like actually telling mature stories and interesting stories and from other people's perspectives are generally published by smaller publishers these days.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that is one of the big differences with it. I think that's why it's held in such regard, is like people haven't necessarily heard of, other books within that, which is, I think, why you and I, while we do love our Batman stories, we also like to try and pick like smaller titles for episodes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're trying to be even better about that in our second year wink, wink, of episodes.
Oink.
Also, while Blade Runner is one of my favorite movies, I do agree with you that there are people that have picked up on the ideas and things that were presented there and run with them. In fact, I think Blade Runner 2049 is actually a better Blade Runner movie than Blade Runner, because it takes all of the things that made that world interesting and takes them to the next level. So if people have still not checked out Blade Runner 2049, please do. It is, and you don't even have to have seen the first one. Actually, my friend that went to see it in the theater with me had not seen the first one, and he absolutely loved it. So,
well, I mean, that was kind of what I was saying, is that like there's Blade Runner and there's Blade Runner 2049, which is like a superior version of the previous film.
Right.
I can't think of like, you know, Watchmen 2 or anything like that. Like something that has managed to, you know, make that kind of a mark on comics as a whole and tell this kind of story since. There are a lot of things that have tried, but I don't think something is yet to come to this point. If you're listening to this and you're like, oh, well, it's obviously this, please tell me. I would be super curious to investigate.
It may be something we've read and are just blanking on, or it could be something that we've just never even heard of that you could point out to us. We definitely would love that kind of feedback, because I think we've said many times on this show that these are just our opinions, and like if you have a totally opposite opinion of us on any of these, that's totally fine. Like you can say that, and we're not going to be like, how dare you not agree with me on that TMNT Batman crossover comic was amazing. Because we're just here to have fun, folks, and talk about comics.
Exactly.
All right, Kieran. Well, that's going to wrap it up for us. Where can people find you online?
I am online. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Mr. K_Bennett, or you can check out my Dungeons and Dragons podcast, which is For Crits and Giggles, which is at For CNG Podcast on Twitter. Jonah, where can people find you?
Oh, you can find me on Twitter at SpamBot. And I also am streaming some games related to comics, because we unlocked that through our Patreon. And I did some X-Men Legends recently, and I need to give a huge shout out because Gary Hayes, I wanted to check his last name because I only know him as Gary mostly online. He sent me a giant ass box of old superhero games. So he sent me, I'm going to read you this list here: Conan, Captain America, Superman Returns, The Punisher, Hulk Ultimate Destruction, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Batman Rise of Sin Tzu, Batman Begins, and Ultimate Spider-Man. Like all the like Xbox, PS2, and a few 360 games. And oh my god, am I excited to play these. And I know some of them are good, and I know some of them are not very good. And so I'm very interested to go back and play them. I also picked up at a used game store a copy of some of the movie tie-in games that they had in stock. So I was able to get the Spider-Man PS2 game that's the tie-in to the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, Sam Raimi movie, the X-Men Origins Wolverine game, which I'm sure is just top-notch, and last, and I'm sure definitely least, the Fantastic Four movie, the game, for PS2, which I am very excited to try because I am sure it is a flaming pile of garbage. Although it may be one of those weird situations where the movie's so bad that the game is actually better than the movie. Because that does happen sometimes. Have you ever played Alien 3 for the Super Nintendo or Genesis? Because that's better than the movie Alien 3 by a long shot. But yeah, that's where you can find me over on Twitter and on our Twitch channel.
Need more mutants, metahumans, and monsters in your life? Then check out these other Geeklying shows like Brute Force, Cast of Thrones, or You're a Wizard, Harry. Help us make the show the best that it can be by supporting us at patreon.com/inksandissues, where you can get bonus content, early access to episodes, and can even vote on comics for us to review. And don't forget to leave a 5-star review to help us spread the word. Interact with us on Twitter at inksandissues or on Twitch at twitch.tv/inksandissues. Now do yourself a favor and go read some gosh dang comics.
And with that, we will see you all next time. Goodbye.
Bye. Love you.
Oh no, Adrian. Looks like the Reds are polluting the city lake. What do we do?
We call the Watchmen. Strong together, united forever, they're the best of friends. But when trouble's about, you'd best watch out for the Watchmen.
Not only is their leader, and he loves to party down. Rorschach's friends to the animals.
Yeah, when he's not clowning around.
Why, nutty.
Beat up some thugs, say no to drugs, be in bed by 10. But if trouble's about, you'd best watch out for the Watchmen.
Spector's a sensation. You should really never miss her. The comedian's her biggest fan now.
If I could only get that kiss.
Ozymandias, couple of crime-solving superstars. John can give you cancer, and they'll turn into a car.
Strong together, united forever, come and meet your friends. Have no fear, time's up, time's here, for the Watchmen.
Watch out.
Dave Gibbons and I cannot remember his name, whoever did the covers. I'm gonna have to look it up now because I gotta give props. I'm so sorry. Just thought I'd kill the momentum that we had going there. Yeah.
That's what you're here for.
Whoa! Damn, that was savage as hell. John Higgins, there we go.
Okay, try that again because I was laughing over it.
I just said you were savage because you said that's what I was here for, to kill the momentum.